Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
At my daughter's wedding, my seat was in the last row in the far corner. I quietly sat down and smiled. But when the host asked everyone to stand, the groom suddenly said, "Wait, I want to say something about the woman in the last row." The room went silent. "Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Collins. Most people called me Maggie, and for the longest time, that name meant something warm. It meant Saturday pancakes with too much syrup, a house that smelled like lavender and old books, a daughter who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. Emily was my whole world. I want you to understand that before anything else. She wasn't just my child. She was the reason I kept going after her father left, the reason I worked double shifts at the hospital administration office for 11 years, the reason I saved every birthday card she ever gave me in a shoebox under my bed. She was my person. We had a good life in Dayton, Ohio. Nothing spectacular. A 2-bedroom house with a crooked front porch, a used Honda that I nicknamed Gerald because it sputtered exactly like my old neighbor Gerald used to when he laughed. Emily went to public school, got decent grades, played in the school orchestra, violin, terribly at first, beautifully by the end. I was at every recital, every single one. When she went off to Columbus for college, I cried for 3 days and then redecorated her room as a home office I never actually used. I called her every Sunday. She always picked up. That was before Daniel Whitfield. Don't misunderstand me. I liked Daniel at first. He was polite, tall, had a way of listening that made you feel heard. When Emily brought him home for Thanksgiving her junior year, he helped me with the dishes without being asked. I thought, this one is different. But Daniel came with Sandra. Sandra Whitfield was his mother. She was 62 years old, recently retired from a career in real estate, and she had the kind of smile that never fully reached her eyes. She was well dressed in the way that is meant to remind you that you are not. The first time we met, a dinner at a restaurant Emily had chosen, somewhere in the middle between Dayton and Columbus, Sandra arrived 15 minutes late, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, and spent the evening asking me questions that sounded like compliments but weren't. "Maggie, how impressive that you managed everything alone," she said, tilting her head just slightly. "Raising Emily on a single income. That must have been so hard." I smiled. I told her it was worth every bit of it. "Of course it was," she said. And then she turned to Emily and started talking about the wedding venue she had already been researching. Emily and Daniel weren't even engaged yet. I told myself it was enthusiasm. Mothers get excited. I understood that. But then smaller things started to accumulate, the way small things do. Quietly, like water, filling a basement. Emily began calling on Saturdays instead of Sundays, then every other Saturday. Sandra, it turned out, hosted Sunday brunches that Emily and Daniel attended weekly. "It's just easier, Mom. We're already there," Emily explained. I said, "Of course, sweetheart, of course." Then there was Claire. My sister Claire had always been competitive with me in the low-grade, deniable way that some siblings are. Never openly cruel. Always able to say I didn't mean it like that. She was 3 years younger, twice divorced, and she had a talent for inserting herself into situations where she could be useful enough to become indispensable. When Sandra met Claire at Emily's graduation party, something shifted. I watched the two of them talking in the corner of the backyard and felt a chill I couldn't explain. Within a month, Claire was attending Sandra's Sunday brunches. "She invited me, Maggie. It's not a big deal. She's perfectly nice." "You've never even met her before this spring," I said. "People meet people. Claire said. "You're being paranoid." Maybe I was. I repeated that to myself a lot in those early months. "You're being paranoid, Maggie. You're being too sensitive. You're reading into things." The engagement was announced on a Tuesday via a photo on Emily's Instagram. I found out the same way strangers did, scrolling through my phone on my lunch break. When I called Emily, she was apologetic but breezy. "It happened so fast, Mom. We were gonna call everyone." Everyone. I was everyone. The wedding planning began without me, not explicitly. There was no conversation where Sandra said, "You are not welcome here." It was subtler than that. Meetings were scheduled on days I worked. My suggestions, offered gently, always gently, were acknowledged and then quietly ignored. The florist Emily had loved as a little girl, whose shop we'd visited every Mother's Day. Sandra already has a contact. The family recipe I'd offered to use for the rehearsal dinner? We're going with a caterer. And Claire somehow was always there, always in the photos, always just helping. I swallowed it. I kept swallowing. And then came the day of the wedding. I want to tell you what that moment felt like. Walking into that beautiful hall in my blue dress, the one I'd bought 3 months earlier and altered twice because I wanted to look right for my daughter's wedding, and being handed a program by a young usher who smiled and said, "Family of the groom or family of the bride?" "Family of the bride," I said. "I'm the mother of the bride." He checked his seating chart twice. Then he walked me, politely, to the last row, corner seat. I looked at those chairs near the front, the ones draped in white ribbon, the ones with small flower arrangements, the ones clearly marked for immediate family. I saw Claire sitting in the third row. Third row. She caught my eye and looked away. I sat down in my corner seat. I smoothed my dress. I smiled because what else does a woman do when she realizes she has been erased from her own daughter's wedding? That's where this story begins. The ceremony was 37 minutes long. I counted. I sat in my corner and I watched my daughter walk down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, Sandra's brother-in-law, a man I'd met twice, because no one had thought to ask me, or someone had decided not to ask me. At the time, I still wasn't sure which was worse. Emily was beautiful. I want to be clear about that even now, even inside all this pain. She was luminous in that dress, her dark hair pinned up the way she used to wear it as a teenager when she was trying to look older. She didn't look at the crowd much. She looked at Daniel. And Daniel, I'll give him this, looked at her like she was the only person in the room. I did not cry during the ceremony. I had decided I would not give Sandra or Claire the satisfaction of seeing me undone. I held my program in my lap and I breathed slowly, and I applauded at the right moments, and I kept my smile fixed like a painting. The reception was held in the adjoining ballroom. Round tables, candles, a DJ who played too much early 2000s pop. There was a seating chart on an easel near the entrance. I found my name. Table 11. Table 11 was near the kitchen doors. I know that sounds like a small thing, but if you've ever planned a wedding or attended enough of them, you know what Table 11 means. It's where you put the distant cousins, the co-workers who had to be invited, the people who matter just enough to include but not enough to consider. I sat between a woman I'd never met, a colleague of Daniel's from his accounting firm, and an elderly man who was hard of hearing and spent the evening cheerfully mishearing everything I said. At table 2, Sandra, Claire, Daniel's aunts and cousins, and 3 of Emily's friends, Girls I had known since middle school, girls who had slept on my couch and eaten my cooking and called me Miss Maggie, who apparently had been reclassified as closer to Sandra than to me. At table 1, the wedding party, I ate my salmon. I drank 1 glass of wine slowly. I watched. Sandra moved through the room like a hostess. Her room. She touched shoulders. She laughed. She directed the photographer. She gave a toast, long, warm, full of stories about Daniel's childhood. And then she gestured to Emily as if presenting something she had personally created. The applause was generous. No one asked me to give a toast. I'm not sure Emily noticed. Or maybe she noticed and didn't intervene. Both possibilities hurt in different ways. Claire gave a toast. Of course she did. She talked about Emily's journey to finding real love and made a joke about childhood that was actually one of my stories, a story I had told at family dinners for years. And she told it as if she had been there, as if she were the mother. The room laughed. I smiled. I picked up my wine glass and I set it down again without drinking. That was the moment something hardened in me. Not broke, hardened. There is a difference. On the drive home that night, an hour and 40 minutes on the highway, alone in Gerald, who sputtered only once, mercifully, I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I made a list, not on paper. In my head, the way I'd been trained to think through patient records and insurance disputes and hospital billing anomalies for over a decade. What did I actually know? I knew that I had been systematically excluded from my daughter's wedding planning. I knew that my seat placement, last row at the ceremony, table 11 at the reception, was not an accident or an oversight. Someone had made those decisions deliberately. I knew that my sister, who had known Sandra Whitfield for less than a year, had been given a more prominent role at my daughter's wedding than I had. And I knew, though I had been refusing to fully name it, that this had been building for longer than the wedding. This had been building for 2 years. The fear came when I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine and sat in the dark. What if Emily didn't want me there? What if my daughter who used to draw me pictures with crayon and tape them to the refrigerator, had chosen this? What if Sandra hadn't pushed me out, but Emily had let it happen? I sat with that fear for a long time. And then I thought about Claire's toast, my story, told in her voice. And I thought about Sandra's hand on Emily's shoulder in every photograph I'd seen from the planning months. And I thought about the Sunday brunches and the florist and the seating chart. No, Emily had not chosen this. Emily had been managed. There's a difference between a daughter who turns away from her mother and a daughter who has been slowly, carefully, deliberately turned. I got out of the car. I went inside. I made chamomile tea and I sat at my kitchen table and I opened my laptop. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do, but I was going to do something. I had spent 2 years being gracious and patient and understanding, and it had cost me my seat at my own daughter's wedding. The plan at that stage was simple. Find out exactly what had been said about me to Emily over 2 years, by whom I had a place to start. Emily and I shared an old family email account, originally set up when Emily was in high school for school forms and shared subscriptions. Neither of us had thought to change the password. Emily had forgotten it existed. I hadn't. I opened it, and I started to read. I want to be honest with you. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at that kitchen table in Dayton with my chamomile tea going cold, and I read for 4 hours. The shared account was mostly old. Grocery lists forwarded from when Emily was in high school, confirmation emails from college applications, the kind of digital debris families accumulate and never clean out. But there were threads I hadn't seen before. Threads that hadn't been there when I last checked the account 2 years ago. Forwarded emails. Emily had used this account occasionally as a secondary forwarding address, something she'd set up in college when she ran out of storage on her main account and never fully dismantled, which meant that certain emails automatically had been copied here, including a thread from 18 months ago between Sandra Whitfield and my sister Claire. I read it 3 times. The language was careful. These were not stupid women. Nothing was explicitly stated, but the meaning was architectural. Sandra had written to Claire asking her to help Emily understand what kind of support system she really needs going into a marriage. Claire had responded that she completely agreed that Maggie's attachment style could be overwhelming for a young woman trying to build her own life. There were 4 more exchanges in the thread. By the end, they had a shared vocabulary. Boundaries, codependency, letting go, that told me exactly what they had been doing. They had been building a case to Emily that I was too much. They hadn't needed to say a single cruel thing about me to my face. They had simply been planting seeds over and over in the mind of a young woman who loved both of them and trusted them and had no reason yet to doubt their intentions. A word here about my neediness. A gentle observation there about how Emily seemed stressed after our phone calls. A suggestion that healthy adult children create some space. I closed the laptop. I walked to my bathroom and I stood over the sink for a long moment. Then I washed my face, dried it carefully, and went back to the table. I did not cry. I had been right about that much, at least. There was something useful in the hardness that had settled in me the night before. The following Monday, I called Dr. Patricia Owens. Patricia was a licensed family therapist I had seen briefly 5 years earlier, during a rough patch after Emily left for college. She was sharp, no nonsense, the kind of therapist who didn't traffic in vague reassurances. I told her I needed to come in. I told her why. I brought printed copies of the email thread. I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I do anything, I told her, sitting across from her in her small, plant-crowded office. I want to know if I'm seeing this clearly. Patricia read the emails. She was quiet for a moment. "You're seeing it clearly," she said. "This is a coordinated pattern of triangulation. It's not uncommon and it's not subtle once you know what you're looking at. What do I do?" "That depends on what you want," she said. "Do you want your sister out of your life? Do you want a relationship with Emily? Do you want Sandra to face some kind of consequence? These are different goals and they require different approaches." "I want my daughter back," I said. "That's the only goal." "Then we start there," she said. But before therapy could address the Emily question, I needed to understand the legal question. 3 days after seeing Patricia, I called a family law attorney named Robert Dean, whose name had been given to me by a colleague at the hospital. I was not considering a lawsuit, not yet, possibly not ever, but I needed to know what, if anything, I had. Robert was direct. "The emails are troubling, but not immediately actionable," he said. "There's no law against 2 adults having a private negative opinion of a third party." What you'd need if you wanted to pursue anything formally is evidence of defamation, false statements of fact presented as true, or evidence of financial manipulation. Financial manipulation? He nodded. Were you ever asked to contribute money to the wedding planning? Did you give any financial gifts that were accepted under false pretenses? I thought about the check I had written 6 months ago, $8,000 given to Emily for whatever you need for the wedding, sweetheart. A check Emily had thanked me for warmly, a check that had apparently purchased me a seat in the last row and a table near the kitchen doors. I told Robert about the check. He wrote something down. Meanwhile, and I only understood this later, reconstructing the timeline, Sandra had noticed something. I had stopped calling Emily every other Saturday. I had stopped sending cheerful texts about wedding details. I had gone quiet, and apparently my silence was more alarming to Sandra than my presence had ever been. Because 2 weeks after the wedding, Claire called me. "Just checking in," Claire said in the particular voice she used when she was fishing. "I'm fine," I said. "Busy." "You seemed a little off at the reception," she said. Emily noticed. Not I was worried about you. Not even the courtesy of a pretense. Just a signal we are watching and we are reporting back. "I'm fine, Claire," I said again. "I'll call you soon." I hung up. I sat very still in my kitchen. And then my email chimed. It was from the venue coordinator, a woman named Teresa Park, whom I had spoken to once, briefly in the early planning stages before I was gently excluded. She'd apparently found my contact information on an early inquiry form and was following up on an invoice discrepancy. She was very apologetic about contacting the wrong person, she said. The invoice for the ceremony seating arrangement had been billed to the bride's family contact, which she had listed as Margaret Collins, but payment had been redirected at the last minute by... She had attached the original invoice. The bride's family contact field had my name. The revised billing instruction, sent 8 months ago, had redirected all family of the bride expenses to Sandra Whitfield's account, with a note attached that read, "Per conversation with bride, mother has requested to be removed from planning responsibilities due to health concerns." I read that line 4 times. Health concerns. I had no health concerns. I had never said any such thing. Someone had contacted this venue coordinator, this woman who had no reason to question it, and told her that I had asked to be removed, in my name, without my knowledge. I forwarded the email to Robert Dean within the hour. He called me back the same afternoon. "This," he said carefully, "is something." Robert Dean's exact words were, "Don't do anything with this yet." I understood. Timing matters. Evidence matters. The impulse to act immediately, to call Emily that night, to confront Claire, to fire off an email to Sandra, was exactly the kind of reactive move that would hand them the narrative they'd been constructing for 2 years. Maggie is unstable. Maggie is overwhelming. Maggie can't respect boundaries. So I waited. I planned. What I wanted was not a confrontation. What I wanted was a conversation with my daughter. A real one, unmediated, without Sandra's framing or Claire's commentary preloaded into Emily's mind. I knew that if I went at Emily with accusations, documents, legal language, I would lose her. She was 4 weeks into her marriage. She was happy, or she believed she was happy, which amounts to the same thing in the short term. She would defend her new family. She would defend Daniel, and defending Daniel meant defending Sandra. So I called Emily on a Tuesday morning, a time I knew Sandra's brunches were not scheduled, a time Daniel would be at work. I kept my voice light. "I'd love to see you," I said. "No agenda, I just miss you. Could we have lunch, just the two of us?" Emily paused. A pause I noted. "Sure, Mom," she said. "That would be nice." We met the following Thursday at a restaurant in Columbus, a quiet Italian place we'd been to together years before, the kind of place that carries comfort in its familiarity. I arrived first. I ordered water and bread, and I sat with my hands folded on the table, and I reminded myself, this is not a deposition. This is your daughter. Emily looked well. A little tired the way newlyweds sometimes are, adjusting to a shared life, but genuinely happy in the eyes. We talked about the honeymoon, about their apartment, about a promotion Daniel was expecting. I listened. I asked questions. I laughed at the right moments. Halfway through our entrees, Emily put down her fork. "Mom," she said, "are you okay? You seem—" "I seem what?" "Different," she said, "like you're being careful." I looked at my daughter, 31 years old, sharp and perceptive in the way she'd always been, and I felt the particular ache of knowing that her perception had been partially redirected for 2 years by people with a specific agenda. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I want you to answer honestly because I can handle it." I took a breath. "Did you know where I was seated at the ceremony?" She blinked. "In the family section?" "Last row," I said. "Corner seat." A silence. "That's not—" She stopped. "Mom, I gave Sandra the seating list to finalize. I was dealing with so much, and she offered to—" "I know," I said quietly. "I'm not blaming you. I didn't tell her about the invoice. Not yet. I didn't mention the emails. I simply said that I had felt invisible over the last 2 years and that I loved her and that I wanted us to find our way back to each other." I said it without trembling, which surprised me. Emily's eyes filled. "I didn't realize," she said. "Mom, I didn't—" "I know, sweetheart." We hugged in the parking lot. It was not a resolution, but it was a thread. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in months, a cautious, careful hope. It lasted approximately 4 days. On the 5th day after my lunch with Emily, my doorbell rang at 7 in the evening. I looked through the window before opening it. Sandra Whitfield and Claire were standing on my front porch. I will tell you honestly, my first instinct was fear. Not because either of these women could physically harm me, but because their presence together, unannounced, at my home, told me that Emily had said something, and Sandra had moved fast. Faster than I'd expected. I opened the door. Maggie. Sandra's smile was the practiced kind. "We were hoping we could talk." "Come in," I said. I offered them nothing. No tea, no water. I sat across from them in my living room and I waited. Sandra did most of the talking. She expressed concern for Emily. She said that Emily had been upset and confused after our lunch, which I privately doubted but did not challenge. She said that the family was still in a delicate adjustment period and that conflict at this stage would harm the marriage. "I'm not creating conflict," I said. "Of course not intentionally," Sandra said. "But Maggie, sometimes love can be a pressure, you know. Without meaning to, we can—" "I spoke to my daughter," I said. "That's not pressure. That's a relationship." Claire, who had been quiet, leaned forward. "Maggie, we know you've been talking to people, a therapist, and apparently a lawyer." I looked at my sister. The woman who had told Sandra's brother's wife's neighbor's hairdresser, apparently, that I was seeing a lawyer, because there was no other way this information had traveled. "I talked to a lot of people," I said. "A lawyer, Maggie." Claire's voice dropped. "What are you thinking? This is Emily's marriage. If you do something that disrupts her happiness—" "Emily's happiness is the only thing I care about," I said, "which is why I'm very interested in making sure she has accurate information about the people around her." Sandra's expression shifted, just slightly. The practiced warmth cracked at the edges. "If you proceed with whatever you're planning," she said, "Emily will have to make a choice, and she will choose her husband. She will choose her family. That's just reality, Maggie. I'm telling you this as one mother to another, as one mother to another." The audacity of that framing nearly made me laugh. "I appreciate you stopping by," I said. I stood up. There was a long moment where Sandra seemed to calculate whether to escalate further. Then she stood too. Claire followed. At the door, Sandra turned. "Think very carefully," she said. "What you do next cannot be undone." "I agree," I said pleasantly. "Good night." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway and I listened to their car pull away. Then I sat down on the bottom stair and I breathed. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my knees and I breathed until they stopped. But underneath the fear was something Sandra had not counted on when she made her calculated visit to my home. She had confirmed that I was right. Innocent people do not show up at your door to warn you to stop what you're doing. She had come because I had found something real, and she knew it. I gave myself the weekend. I ordered Thai food. I watched old movies. I called Patricia Owens Monday morning and told her what had happened, and she said, "Good. You held your ground." I was terrified, I admitted. "Holding your ground while terrified is the only kind that counts," she said. The week after Sandra and Claire came to my door was the quietest week I'd had in years. No texts from Claire, no forwarded cheerful links with passive-aggressive subtext, no calls from Emily that felt slightly too bright, too composed, slightly managed, just silence. And I knew, Patricia had warned me, that silence from people like Sandra is not peace. It is observation. They were watching to see whether the confrontation had worked, whether I would crack under the pressure of the quiet, whether I would reach out anxiously to smooth things over the way I had been trained to do for 2 years. I didn't. I went to work. I processed insurance claims and managed billing discrepancies and ate my lunch in the break room with my colleagues. I came home. I cooked real meals instead of subsisting on crackers and worry, which had been my pattern. I slept more than 6 hours. On Wednesday, I drove to see my friend Donna. Donna Baxter had been my closest friend for nearly 20 years. We'd met in a neighborhood book club that neither of us remembered what book we'd started with, and stayed friends through 2 of her moves, my divorce, Emily's childhood, and everything in between. She was blunt, practical, and deeply loyal, and I had been keeping her at arm's length for 6 months because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had let things get this far without naming them. I told her everything. Sitting in her kitchen in Yellow Springs with actual tea this time and her dog asleep across my feet, I told her about the seating chart and the invoice and the emails and Sandra's visit and Claire's betrayal. It took over 2 hours. Donna listened without interrupting, which was one of her great gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said, "I met Sandra once, at Emily's engagement party, the backyard thing." I remember. She introduced herself to me as Emily's second mother. I stared at her. I didn't say anything to you at the time because I thought maybe it was just an awkward way of expressing something. Maybe I was reading into it. Donna wrapped her hands around her mug, but I watched her the whole party. She kept redirecting Emily. Every time you and Emily got into a real conversation, Sandra appeared. A question for Emily, a person she had to meet, something that needed to be handled right now. I clocked it 3 times. "Why didn't you say anything?" Donna looked at me steadily. "Because you seemed okay, and I thought maybe I was being uncharitable." And then time passed. She paused. "I'm sorry, Maggie." "Don't be," I said. "I probably wouldn't have believed you then anyway." What Donna said next mattered. She told me that she had talked to Linda Marsh, another woman from the old book club, who also attended the engagement party, and that Linda had made a similar observation. Not in detail, just a vague unease about the way the dynamic had looked. These were not legal witnesses. They were not evidence in any formal sense. But they were something Robert Dean had asked me about. A pattern, established over time, witnessed by multiple people. I called Linda that evening. Linda remembered more than I expected. She remembered specifically that at the engagement party, she had overheard Sandra telling 2 of Emily's college friends that I had been having some difficulties lately and had needed to take a step back from planning. At the time, Linda had assumed it was medical. She had felt sympathetic toward me. She had not known it was fabricated. "Would you write that down?" I asked her. "Not for anything official, just would you write down what you heard with a date and context and send it to me?" "Of course," Linda said without hesitation. 2 days later, a carefully written email arrived from Linda Marsh. Factual, specific, dated to the best of her recollection. I forwarded it to Robert Dean. He called me the following morning. "I want to be careful about managing your expectations," he said. "This is still a family dispute, and courts are reluctant to intervene in those unless there's significant harm. But what you're building is something important, regardless of whether it becomes legal." He paused. "You're building a record, and records have a way of becoming useful." "Useful how?" I asked. "When Emily asks questions," he said simply. "Someday she will ask questions, and when she does, you won't have to convince her of anything. You'll just show her what you have." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. Outside my kitchen window, early October light was doing something golden across the yard. Gerald sat in the driveway, patient and familiar. I thought about Emily at 11 years old, helping me paint the front porch, badly, enthusiastically, getting pale yellow paint on the dog we had then, a beagle named Horatio, who accepted the indignity with great patience. She was still that girl. Underneath everything Sandra had layered over her, she was still that girl. I just had to be patient enough and clear-eyed enough and strong enough to wait for her to find her way back. Sandra and Claire said nothing that week, or the next. They were watching. I let them watch. It was a Sunday afternoon in late October when they tried again. Claire texted the morning before. "Sandra and I would love to come by tomorrow if that's okay. Just to clear the air." The politeness of the message was its own signal. When Claire asked permission, she was planning something. I replied, "Sure, 2 p.m. That evening, I reread every document in my manila folder: invoice, email thread, Linda's statement, Patricia's notes. I didn't need to reread them. I had them memorized. But handling the physical paper steadied me. They arrived at 2 on the dot. Sandra carried grocery store flowers. Claire had a tin of cookies she clearly hadn't made herself. I accepted both without comment. We sat in the living room. Sandra had rehearsed this. I could tell by the cadence. Slightly too smooth, slightly too prepared. She said she had been reflecting deeply since their last visit. She acknowledged that she had perhaps overstepped in some wedding logistics and wanted to apologize for any hurt feelings. The apology contained no specifics and accepted no concrete responsibility. "Thank you," I said. I did not say apology accepted. Then came the proposal. Sandra reached into her bag and produced a folded document. She set it on the coffee table. We thought it might help everyone to have some structure going forward. A family agreement about communication, how we all interact with Emily, how we make sure she doesn't feel caught in the middle, really for her sake. I looked at the document but did not touch it. "Who drafted this?" I said. "I worked on it with a mediator friend. It's just an informal understanding, nothing legal." "Nothing legal," said by a woman who knew exactly what those words were designed to make me feel. I picked it up and read it. 2 pages, single-spaced, full of words like mutual respect and healthy boundaries. But buried in the 3rd paragraph was a clause requiring all parties to channel communication about family concerns through a designated family mediator, who, as identified in a footnote, was Sandra's mediator friend, before taking any external action. External action, the phrase used to describe, for example, speaking to a lawyer. This was a muzzle dressed as a peace offering. I set it down and folded my hands. "I appreciate the thought," I said. "I won't be signing this." "It's a reasonable document," Sandra said smoothly. "We all sign it. It protects everyone." "It doesn't protect me. It asks me to hand oversight of my own legal decisions to someone who works with you." Claire leaned forward. "Maggie, if you don't sign, Sandra is going to tell Emily that you're pursuing legal action against her husband's family. Emily will be devastated." There it was, beneath the flowers and the rehearsed apology, the same threat now stated plainly. "I'm not pursuing legal action against Emily's husband's family," I said, which was technically true. "I am gathering information, and I believe my daughter is an adult who can form her own opinions when she has accurate information." Sandra's voice dropped, quieter, sharper, the pleasantness no longer useful. "She chose her family. She chose Daniel. You inserting yourself with legal threats and therapy narratives will only force her to cut contact with you entirely. Is that what you want?" The word "cut" landed exactly as it was meant to. I looked at Sandra. Her precise blouse, her expensive earrings, her composed face, and I thought about the invoice. Per conversation with bride, mother has requested to be removed due to health concerns. Written by this woman in my name, without my knowledge. I think you should go, I said. "Maggie," Claire reached toward me. I moved my hand away. "I think you should go now," I repeated, quietly, steadily. Sandra stood and smoothed her jacket. "This is a mistake," she said. "Good night," I said. I stood at the window and watched their car disappear down the street. Then I sat on the couch and let the fear arrive fully. She will cut contact. The most precise threat available to someone who knew exactly where my heart was kept. I felt it, named it. I am afraid of losing my daughter. Then I asked myself what this fear recommended. Not retreat, move more carefully and move faster. I called Robert Dean's office and left a voicemail saying I wanted to discuss our timeline. Then I made tea and thought about what came next. Wait, I need to go back. I need to take you back to the wedding because that's where the story lives. That's where everything either broke open or stayed buried. But to understand what happened in that hall, you need to understand what happened in the 6 weeks before it. Because by the time I sat down in that last row corner seat in my blue dress, I had not simply been waiting. I had been working. Robert Dean and I had spoken 4 times in the month following Sandra's second visit. What we had was not enough for a lawsuit, but it was enough for something else. Something that required neither a courtroom nor a confrontation, but simply the truth, placed in the right hands at the right moment. The right hands were Daniel's. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I heard a voice I knew but hadn't expected. "Mrs. Collins, this is Daniel." He told me that since Emily and I had shared lunch, Emily'd been different, quieter, more uncertain. He said he'd noticed a pattern he hadn't been able to name until recently. Every time Emily came home from seeing me, she seemed lighter. Every time Sandra managed some communication between us, Emily came home anxious and second-guessing herself. "I didn't see it at first," he said. "I wanted to believe my mother's intentions were good." "They may have started that way," I said carefully. "Mrs. Collins, did my mother do something? With the wedding planning?" I told him the truth. Not everything. Not the full legal detail, but the invoice, the email thread, the seating. A long silence. "She told the venue you had health concerns," Daniel said. His voice was flat. "She put that in writing." "Yes." Another silence, longer. "I want to fix this," he said. "Will you trust me?" He told me his plan. And so, I sat in the last row. Not because I had been placed there helplessly, but because Daniel had asked me to stay in that seat, to not move when the ushers directed me there, to let the placement stand exactly as Sandra had arranged it. Just until the right moment, he'd said. I had agreed. It was the hardest thing I'd done in 2 years. Sitting in that corner, watching Emily walk down the aisle without me, watching Claire in the 3rd row, watching Sandra in the 2nd. That required a discipline I could only maintain because I knew what was coming. What I didn't know was exactly what Daniel would say. The reception was underway. Dinner had been cleared. The DJ had played 3 songs. Then Daniel took the microphone, not the MC, Daniel himself, and smiled at the room. "I want to take a few minutes before the dancing. My wife is going to kill me or kiss me, but we'll see which." Light laughter. "There's someone in this room," he said, "who made Emily the person I fell in love with. Someone who worked double shifts for 11 years to give her a life. Someone who was at every recital, every difficult moment. Not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be." The room stilled. "Due to some decisions made during our planning process," Daniel continued, his voice steady, "that person was placed in the last row tonight. I want to address that directly." He looked out at the hall. "I'd like everyone to see Mrs. Margaret Collins, and I'd like everyone to know that her placement was not her choice, and it was not Emily's choice, and it will not stand." He turned to Emily. Emily looked at him with the expression of someone whose world is reorganizing itself in real time. "I should have caught this earlier," he said quietly. But the microphone was still on. "I'm sorry. I'm asking you now to go get your mother." The hall was completely silent. Emily stood. She looked toward the back of the room, toward me. I raised my hand, just slightly. She walked the full length of the reception hall, past table after table, past Sandra, who had gone very still, calculating damage control with great urgency, past Claire, whose face had turned a color I did not feel charitable enough to describe. Emily reached me. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "I know, sweetheart," I said. She took my hand and led me to the front of the room. She placed me in the seat beside hers. The room applauded. Sandra did not applaud. She sat with her wine glass and her controlled expression, and she watched me take my seat at my daughter's side. I looked at her, just once, and thought, "You placed me in the last row, and your son just walked me to the front." Claire left the reception within 20 minutes. Sandra remained but spoke to no one, responding only in obligatory murmurs to the woman beside her. When the DJ finally started the music, Emily and I danced together. Nothing formal, just the two of us, in the middle of a crowded hall, among people who had just witnessed something real. "What don't I know?" Emily said into my ear over the music. "Quite a bit," I said, "but we have time, and I have documentation." She pulled back and looked at me. Then she laughed. "You have documentation." "I work in hospital billing," I said. "I always have documentation." The morning after the wedding, Emily called at 8:30. "Can I come over?" She arrived at 10 with Daniel. They had already talked. I made coffee, put the manila folder on the kitchen table, and sat across from them without filling the silence. Emily read slowly, leaning forward the way she always had. When she reached the invoice, "Mother has requested to be removed from planning responsibilities due to health concerns," she stopped. "She said you asked for this," Emily said. "I didn't." "She told me you said the planning was too overwhelming, that you'd spoken to her directly." "I never spoke to her about stepping back, not once." Emily looked at Daniel. He put his hand over hers. "I believed her," Emily said to herself more than to me. "She said it so normally, like it was already settled, and I was dealing with so much." Her voice broke. "I should have called you and asked you directly." "You were being managed by someone very skilled at it," I said. "This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate." I walked her through the rest. The email thread between Sandra and Claire, Linda's statement, the pattern Patricia had identified. I kept my voice level. Evidence, not grievance. Emily listened to all of it. Then she closed the folder and sat with her hands flat on the table. "I need to talk to Sandra," she said, "alone, with Daniel." Of course. Sandra had answered Emily's call with her usual bright composure. "Come for coffee. What a lovely surprise." Not yet understanding that Daniel had changed sides. She had made the classic miscalculation of powerful people, surrounded by compliance. She'd confused his politeness for loyalty. The conversation at Sandra's house lasted an hour and 40 minutes. I know the shape of it from what Emily told me afterward. Sandra had denied, then reframed. When Daniel produced a screenshot of a text, Sandra referring to me as the problem we need to manage quietly, she pivoted to justification. She said she'd only been protecting the marriage, that I was difficult, that someone had to make the hard decisions. She looked at Daniel and said, "You know I'm right, darling," Emily told me. Daniel had said, "You forged a communication from my mother-in-law to a vendor. That's fraud, Mom." Sandra had gone silent. There was no dramatic scene after that. No slamming doors. Sandra became composed in the way of someone who understands they have lost. She said they all needed time. She did not apologize. Emily told her she'd be in touch. Claire, I handled myself. I called her and said, I know what you did. I have the email thread. I have Linda Marsh's statement. I want you to know that I know. She tried the familiar paths. You're misinterpreting. I was trying to help. And I let her finish. Then I said, I'm not pursuing anything formal against you. You're my sister, and I believe you didn't fully understand what you were helping to build. But I'm not available for this kind of relationship anymore. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Don't call Emily. I hung up. Robert Dean confirmed that the invoice situation was potentially actionable as misrepresentation to a vendor, but that pursuing it formally would primarily prolong the conflict. I agreed. The record existed. That was enough. What I had wanted from the beginning was not a verdict. It was my daughter. 3 months after the wedding, I sat in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with coffee, morning light, and a text from Emily. Coming Saturday, bringing leftover soup. Can I bring Daniel? I typed back, yes, bring him. Bring all of it. The following spring was the first spring in 3 years that felt like mine again. I repainted the front porch. A pale sage green Emily had suggested, warm in the afternoon light. Daniel came over one Saturday to help and spent most of it doing things wrong in ways I found oddly endearing. That became the new normal. Daniel on Saturdays, Emily calling on Sundays because she wanted to. The 3 of us having dinner in my kitchen, pasta, open wine, easy conversation, and Emily falling asleep on the couch afterward with her feet tucked under her, looking peaceful. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that until I had it back. Sandra's influence contracted the way influence built on false structures does when the structure is named. She tried to maintain her position through a campaign of grievance, but Daniel had spoken to his family with specifics and evidence. The people who knew him didn't believe he'd simply been manipulated by his wife. The Sunday brunches grew smaller, then irregular. Claire went through her own quieter reckoning. Emily didn't make a dramatic statement. She simply became less available until Claire tried to address it, and Emily said calmly that she needed time. I told Claire the door wasn't closed. That was the truth, and I meant it. At Christmas, Emily and Daniel stayed 2 nights. We cooked messily. She played violin in the living room, and we put the old ornaments on the tree. She held up the lopsided clay star from 2nd grade. Did you actually keep this? I kept everything, I said. She hung it at the top. What I learned. You cannot out-manipulate a woman who refuses to be managed. The moment you decide to see clearly, really see without the mercy of denial, you become ungovernable. What would you have done in that last row? Whatever your answer, I hope you held your ground. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved you, leave a comment and share it with anyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong at the front. They do.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.